Alright, I've got some buttonholes here, and I want to show you guys my tricks for buttonholes. Alright, so you always have to have a button before you can decide what the buttonhole length is, because that's what determines it. So the way you calculate a buttonhole is you take the diameter of the button, and then you add on to that the width of the button, and then you add 1/8 of an inch. So in this case, it's going to be 1 inch is the length of my buttonhole. And that gives me enough room for my button to fit through, and it has a little bit of wiggle room, right? You don't want a lot of wiggle room because that's no good. You don't want it to be like, oh cool, I can move around this much, right? But you also want it to be able to fit through with its full width, and you want it to have a little bit of wiggle room and not be like really tight every time you have to fit it into this hole, right? So a lot of places you will see that it has diameter and then it has plus 1/4 of an inch. So for something that is like this is what, 3/4 of an inch, and then yeah, it'll have 1/4 of an inch. And that works out. That's what this one is because it's about 1/8 of an inch wide. So in this case it works. But basically that formula, it's a formula that is made with the assumption that all of your buttons are 1/8 of an inch wide. And that's not true. This one is actually a little bit wider, has a bit of a lip. Usually I only measure it to like this part, and then kind of this curved part inside doesn't usually contribute too much, because really it's just got to have this thickness to go through the buttonhole. But if I have a button that's thicker, I'm going to want to compensate, right? So if I have a button that is a whole 1/4 of an inch wide, and then I use the rule where it's the diameter plus 1/4, I'm going to have no wiggle room. It's going to barely fit, and that's about it. So that's why I think my formula is a little bit more precise. It's one I learned in school, so I like it. So anyway, so that's how you calculate the length of a buttonhole. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to do a buttonhole on a scrap. And usually you'll want to have your buttonhole a certain distance from the edge of the fabric, depending on what it is. It might be like, in this case we'll do like 1/2 an inch, so we'll say that we want to have our buttonholes 1/2 an inch from the edge, right? So you would mark that. This can be 1/2 an inch, it can be 1/4, it can be 1/8, depending on its position and placement. It's smaller on like a 1 inch button band, right? We've got cuffs, we've got lots of things, so depends, right? But basically I'm going to say this is where my button holes are going to end, right? And then from that, I am going to mark, I'm just going to do one in the middle, let's say. I would measure where that is, right? This is just a sample though. So then I'm going to draw a line that is perpendicular to that. And I know that my buttonhole, based off of my button, is 1 inch long. So I'm going to mark that. So this is how buttons are annotated, with like a little line and then a dash here and a dash here to indicate the start of the buttonhole, the end of the buttonhole, and then the length, right? The line that you follow when you put it through the machine. So we've got this, yay, 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 buttonhole marked, right? There we go. So now we're going to sew it. Alright, so we're going to use our lovely buttonhole foot, which is fantastic. So we have feet for doing this. These are the nice ones. You can use some of the just like 3 that has like a wider area here. But if you have this foot, this is my favorite. It's got some extra computerized parts on it, so it's a very fancy foot. Yes, yes, yes. We love it. We love it. We love it. So let's use it. Alright, so we got our machine here, and normally it looks like, whew, back to normal. No. So normally this is what your setup looks like here, right? On this machine, you're going to click this guy, and then we're just going to do a normal buttonhole. So I've got a section, I've got a whole ton of buttonholes that I can choose from, which is pretty cool. So that's a thing. Some of them have dials over here, and then they'll have different like steps of the buttonhole, and you have to manually change it each time you like move on from one step to the next. So that's the thing. And some of them, just once you start the foot and you've done it once, it'll just automatically do it again and again and again, which is pretty cool. Mine is somewhere in between. It'll do the thing, and it'll do it well, and it does it computerized, but I do need to tell it to move on to each step by pressing the back button. Some of them, instead of pressing the back button, they'll have a different button that you'll press, so this depends a lot on the machine. Mine's a Bernina Artista 730, so this is how it works for this machine. It is not the same for every machine, there's a lot of variety, but the basics are the same. So the cool thing about this buttonhole is that it's got this dial. So this has this slidey thing here, and there's this little red notch right here. So what you do is you take the length of your buttonhole and you measure from this red line up here, and then you can slide this into the place that you want. And it's easier with a seam gauge, but it's hard for me to hold it this way for you to see and also do it. But basically, yeah, I'm like, okay, I need 1 inch, right? So I've got my inch marked, and I've got that here. And then as this sews, it moves along this dial, and then you know once they match up, once this little red guy here matches up with this one, you see that red one? Once it comes to here, you know that you're ready to move on to the next step, right? So once I get here, I know that I can do my bar tack and go back and do my next step, right? So that's how you know. That's a cool thing about this foot. So this is how I can make sure that my buttonhole length stays the same every time. So I'm going to put this guy in. And then one additional thing that I have to do is I have to move my threads. I have to pull my thread, my top thread, kind of through this. There we go. So I got my threads off to the side now. Alright, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to line this top line up right under the needle. So I'm going to put this right here, and then I'm lining up this middle, the middle notch right here, I'm lining up with this middle line that I drew, right? So I'm starting with this first step, right? Let's do it. So of course I hold my threads because you don't want bobbinart on these, because picking these out is not very fun. Now I have two things telling me the length of the buttonhole. I have this here, and I also have my line on my fabric. So I have two methods to do it for, higher precision, which is nice. Alright, you see how now that this dial, this slidey thing, has matched up with the red notch in here, now I know I've gotten my buttonhole length, right? These are the same space. So that's the right length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and I want to move on to the next step now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press my back button, and now that I've done that, it's going to go backwards now. Now I've gotten back to the start. You can see this here. This is the step I'm on. I press the back button, and we're going to do the next step, which is a bar tack at the top. See that? Then it's going to move on automatically to the next step. I wait again for these to align together. And again, I'm going to press the back, and it moves us on to the next step, which is the final bar tack. And once it finishes, it stops. My foot is still pressing the pedal right now. My foot is on the pedal at this moment. The needle's not moving because it knows that's it. So that's pretty cool. So now I can pull it up, and this guy bumps back into its normal position. And here is what I have. Got a little janky there because I was showing you things and not paying attention. And that's why I do this on a sample instead of all the real thing when I'm showing you this time, because because I don't want to mess up my real garments. Awesome. So now we have a buttonhole. Again, this one's a bit ugly. Sorry, I was trying to show you things simultaneously. It makes it a little harder sometimes. Alright, but there it is. Yay, buttonhole! And now I've got the length marked, and I can do the exact same thing again. And you see this is already restarted and is already like ready to go on the first step for the next one, which is pretty cool. So there's that. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to open a buttonhole the proper way. So what you want to do is you want to take a pin and looking at the buttonhole, let's add wood. So I've got this bar tack down here, a bar tack up here, and then some really tight stitches, some nice satin stitches right up against each other, right? So what I want to do is I want to stick this right in front of the bar tack. You can also do it right on top of it if you're really precise. So I'm putting this pin right on top, right? Or right next to it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my seam ripper and I can stick it through my fabric. And this is pretty thick. This is 2 layers of linen, so it's kind of a lot, but here we go. And now I'm just going to seam rip. And I go all the way up to the top, and you see how the pin, because of its placement, the pin keeps me from going past. So the pin keeps me from going past this and ripping out the bar tack. So that pin is what makes it so that I can cut this open really nicely, really smoothly, and not break anything. Yay! Thank you, pin. And if I didn't get close enough on this end, awesome. I just do the same thing. Stick my pin over here. Let's get a little closer, right? There we go. You can also always afterwards grab your snip scissors, cut a little closer, could put your pin in to also not cut past. And then what you're going to want to do, usually you'll have a thread or two, and for craftsmanship and a pretty look, you'll cut those away, right? Do a little snippy snip snip. And then we have a beautiful and functional buttonhole. Anyway, so there you go. That's how to do a buttonhole. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something. See you later.